how I got in, there was a guy who was doing it's before they had the English language commentators on NHK.
Mm-hmm.
And I was invited as a charter commentator. So he was doing this kind of a wrap up every day. So he approached me. We were kind of friends. I saw him around the stadium all the time. So he approached me and he said, I'd like you to do some drawings that I could use for the backdrop for my TV show. So I said, okay, where should I do them? He said, well, I'm going to get you a wansho. A wansho is an armband. He said, I want you to go into the dressing room, if you don't mind. I thought, if you don't mind, I'm there. And because that's where you get the stuff that nobody else sees, So I had the wansho, and I could go in anywhere I wanted to do anything I wanted, and nobody could say boo to me. And of course, this hasn't happened before. I mean, the reporters go in at a certain time, around 2:30, 3 o'clock. No, not even then. They're allowed to go in toward the end of the day, but they're men. And women never go into the dressing room, except, during, some of the show sumo, not the real tournament. The women are not allowed in there. And so I walked in, and the guys already knew me because I was at practice every day. So nobody, from the youngest guys to the top guys, I mean, they know who I am. So I walked in, it was no big deal. They didn't care. And I just kind of sat down next to somebody and I started drawing. And again, they were used to my doing this for years. When I got all the drawings the guy needed, and he blew them up like giant size and used them as backdrops for his show, I just kept going in. I just hung on to the wansho. And every tournament I'd say, hey, can I have a wansho? Yeah, here. So I just did it for like 2 years. And then he said, I can't give it to you anymore because the Sumo Association doesn't want me to give it to you. I said, okay, fine. So I went in without the wansho because they were so used to seeing me. Right. And nobody ever complained until many years later. There's always one, Right. One guy was a little pissy and he said, yeah, she's always coming in here. I don't think it's a good idea. And it happens that I was then engaged to marry Iwatora Zeki. And you know about that, right, Tora?
I don't tell our listeners.
Oh, you don't know?
I don't know the story.
Oh, I guess. Oh, so long ago.
Laurie told me some of this, but our listeners don't know, and they want to know.
Well, it's a long story. It's I'm writing my memoir of my 42 years working sumo, and there are a lot of stories in there. Some of it is about the sumo world behind the scenes, the whole thing. Some of it is about getting married in Japan, which I did 3 times, and I was there for 40 years,
Yeah.
And I kept making mistakes. My fault. I keep choosing the wrong guy. Anyway, I met Tora. It's a long story, and he asked me to marry him. That's also a crazy story because I thought, what? But I wound up marrying him. Oscar de la Renta made my dress because he was a friend of mine and he loved it and he loved Tora. Okay. And so nobody knew at the moment. We were keeping it a secret. And there was a top division guy in Tagoyama Bay named Dayo, who really nice guy, who I had introduced to Jerry Hall. Jerry Hall, I don't know if you know her name, she's a very famous fashion. Yeah, and she was one of Oscar's top models, and I was always seeing her because I was always going with Oscar to his fashion shows. So I introduced Jerry Hall to Dayo, and he flipped out over her, and that's another story, which actually it's her story. I can't tell it, but anyway. So he came up to me one day and he said, oh my God, people are starting to talk about you and Tora. I thought it was supposed to be a secret. And I said, well, yeah. He said, well, people are starting to talk. I said, well, tell them they're crazy. They don't know what they're talking about. So Tora was in the dressing room one day when this guy started complaining that, oh, that girl who does sumo drawings is always in here. This is no good. And Tora walked up to him, and Tora, is like a wallflower. He was very highly liked. Everybody loved Tora because he's like, like a lot of these guys, he's a pussycat, and he would never speak up for himself. And, but he was damn good. He was the smallest guy in the top division in his time because he could take all the big guys down because he knew all the waza, all the techniques.
What year was he wrestling? What were the years?
He retired in 1978, I think. And he was a sekitori at the beginning of the 70s, maybe the late 60s. I can't remember. I didn't know him then. I met him in 1975, 76, when I started going to Kaskanobeya every day. But he had had a very bad injury. And the sumo world is not famous for being clever about medical emergencies or
Right.
medical help. And anyway, that's another story. But so he lost the use of his left leg because the hamstring was disconnected behind the knee.
Ooh.
Oh,
Yeah, it was a terrible. I mean, he lost the fight on the dohyo when he was Maigashira Nanamaime, number 7, and the guy fell on top of him, and his leg was out at an odd angle. When the guy fell on top of him, it pulled out the middle. The hamstring has 4 legs, they call it, and it
Yeah.
pulled out the middle 2 legs of the hamstring from behind his knee, and it snapped into his thigh.
Oh.
And to this day, he's 72 years old, and he still has this huge, lump in the back of his thigh. And if you look at him, like he wears bathing suits or short shorts, and he looks like he has this great, muscular. It's not. It's that muscle that had snapped into his thigh and has been sitting there all these years because it rendered his leg useless for sumo. So after that, when you watched him do sumo, he did it standing. He always had his left leg in the air, and he did sumo on one leg. Which, I mean, who can do that? But he did it because he had to.
wow.
Because if he stepped on the left leg, he'd go down. Oscar De La Renta loved him, so he said he'd come to our wedding in Tokyo, and he made my dress. And I forgot where I was going with that. Do you remember? I just get all over the place with this stuff.
No, but this is so fascinating.
Yeah.
And
So
so
good.
you were going to the Heya, and is that where your prior husband, is that where he saw you, or how did you get?
That's where we met.
And,
Yes.
and were
Well,
you allowed to date, or did he have to get permission from his stable master to see you?
every stable has its own rules
Right.
according to the shisho, the stable owner, the top Oyakata. I was just going to Kasukano Bay every day. I had very high level introductions to 3 major stables. That's another long story. So I was given carte blanche to come and go. So I went every single day. I was there at 7:30, drawing. And then I'd go to the tournament every day if the tournament was on. But I went to the stables for practice even if the tournament wasn't on. So one day, Tora, who I didn't really know, he came up to me after practice, and he said that he had a good friend who was the producer of, Osaka, of the UNICEF fundraising show, which we have here, we have
Yeah.
here. The guy asked him if he would ask me if I would donate some drawings to their UNICEF fundraiser. And if I did, because every year I went to the Kyoto Jungyo, the Kyoto tour with everybody, and I paid for it myself, and I somehow got along, even though my Japanese was like hardly existent in the 70s. And he said if I would donate some drawings to his show, he would sponsor or pay for my trip to Kyoto and put me up in a ryokan. And I said, yeah, I mean, I would have donated them anyway. So he put Tora, everybody called him Tora, or Torazeki. He put Torazeki in charge of me, which was great for me because I was no longer on my own. I went down on the bus with all the sumo wrestlers. That was the beginning of that, because from then on, when I went on world tours in the mountains and everything, I would go on the sumo bus where nobody was allowed, not even the journalists. But I was given permission. And I would sit on the bus and I would draw until I got nauseous, and I put the sketchbook away for a half hour, and I'd start drawing again until I got nauseous again. I'd get cars. And I did I have some great drawings from the bus. And I'd be on the Rinji Reisha, which was the train, the sumo train, when they didn't take buses. It was just great. So I went down with Tora and and the guys on the bus to Kyoto, and he escorted me in a taxi to the ryokan, put me up there. And, have you ever been to a Japanese ryokan?
I have not.
In the
No,
boondocks?
I lived there, but I didn't get the experience that, I needed to be there for longer.
Well, they're like old-fashioned, old Japanese style wooden houses with the sliding doors and the tatami, the whole thing. I mean, it's a throwback to 200 years ago. And so Tora preceded me. He's wearing his beautiful kimono. He's got his top knot. He's the sumo wrestler. So everybody says, "Oh, Sakitori, because all the little grandmas who are at least 95 years old to qualify to run a ryokan, they're all like rabid sumo fans,
Right.
and total groupies. So Tora walks in swishing in his kimono, his silk kimono, and I'm following him. And they kind of look at but gaijin, what's that? Anyway, so Tora speaks up and he says, this is Lynn. She's they explained what I was doing. And he also explained that he and I were engaged. Oh, no, he didn't say we were engaged. He said we're good friends because we weren't engaged then. He explained, he did that later. He explained that we're good friends and that I'm working for the UNICEF TV show, whatever, and that I'm going to be staying there for the duration of the tour of the Jungyo. And they said, okay. And they were kind of, well, you know, is she going to walk around in shoes? Is she going to know how to take the bath? And, you know, all these stupid questions. And he assured them that I was very savvy about the Japanese way of doing things. They should not worry. And he handed them a bunch of money as a tip.
Uh-huh.
And later I said to Tori, don't you tip them after it's over? He said, no. You give them a lot of money up front and they take good care of you because now they're obligated. So that's the philosophy. And they took very good care of me. And they actually made me American style coffee and they made me toast that wasn't 3 inches thick. It was only a ½ inch thick and, you know, all that stuff. You're laughing because you know how they make toast there, my God. Anyway, so, and then he picked me up every morning, took me to practice, took me to the stadium, sat in the dressing room, and that was that. And that's how I, you know, started getting kind of embedded into the world of sumo. And I really, you know, it took me a long time to network and meet the right people and have them see my work, my artwork, and agree that the artwork was quality and maybe I do a good job and maybe I'm trustworthy and a lot of maybes, because, you know, a lot of people looked at me like, who the hell is this? We don't want her here because she's foreign and she's a woman. Two bad things against me, you know. But, you know, I used to say, especially sitting in the dressing rooms of the top kabuki actors, which I did for 25 years and got some amazing drawings. My own mother wouldn't recognize me because my behavior was not the daughter she knew. It was everything that I could psychically and otherwise pick up and understand that was required of me. And I looked around and I watched all the other Japanese women, especially the older women. You want to learn how to function as a woman in Japanese society, especially traditional society, because these are traditional worlds where they're living way before the Meiji era. They're living 200, 300, 400 years ago, some of these people. And some of them are old enough to have been alive then, I'm telling you. And so you need, as a woman, I tried to mimic the behavior of every old lady I ever saw. You know, the way I would, you know, my body language, the way I would humble myself and the way I would bow to people. And, you know, a foreigner bowing is stupid looking, but if you do it in the right place at the right time and don't overdo it, it pleases them and it makes them relax and feel comfortable with you. And by association with that particular behavior, assume that maybe you'll be okay and you won't walk around their ryokan in shoes.
Right.
You know?
Yeah,
Exactly.
When I was living in Japan, I was there for all of 98. And
Uh-huh.
so I came into the sport with Akebono and Musashi Maru.
Right.
And so they're like my gateway sumo wrestler.
Wow, you could do worse.
Right. So I've been fascinated with it, but I know that you, in your artwork, you have featured quite a bit of those two wrestlers.
Yeah, well, you know, when they came in, they spent a lot of time in my house because they didn't speak Japanese and they wanted to eat American food. And I lived, you know, I had a house in Hawaii, you know, my kids loved it. I mean, they just felt at home. So they were always at the house. And then, you know, so it was easy to work with them. But I mean, I worked with everybody, not just with them.
Right.
For years, I was at Kasukan Obeya with the Rijicho, the chairman of the Sumo Association, and he would always give me advice, you know.
Mm-hmm.
It's funny because when I would walk into Kasukan Obeya and people were sitting just inside the front door, kind of cowering and not getting near him because he was like a god to some people, you know how some people are. And they'd say, oh, you can't get near him. He's the Rijicho. And I'd say, yeah, wakarimashita. And then because he was looking at me and he was patting the tatami next to him, you know, like, come here and sit next to me. So that's what I did every day. And people were looking at me like, what's wrong with her? She's stupid. She's a foreigner. She doesn't know what the hell she's doing. Yeah, I had to ignore those people. But he always gave me really good advice. And one is, like he said, I really love what you're doing and I support what you're doing and I want you to keep doing it and bring the beauty of sumo to the outside world because you come in here where nobody can come in from the outside world. He said, but I can't do anything special for you because I'm the Rijicho. I'm everybody's Rijicho, which means chairman, you know. I have to be there for everybody. I can't be there just for you and show favoritism. And you have to do the same thing. You can't just work with one guy because it's easy or comfortable. You have to work with everybody so that nobody feels left out. So I always remembered that advice. It was good advice, you know.
So tell us a little bit about the style of the artwork that you're doing.
I do what you call reportage artwork. And that means, you know, drawing very fast, drawing people or animals or whatever. You know, I work with equestrian out here because it's horse country. No sumo wrestlers, unfortunately, except for the one I was married to. He has his own house. He lives about 10 miles away. Anyway, so I studied with a great guy named Jack Potter, a fabulous teacher in New York for many years. And then, you know, I worked with sumo like night and day for 40 years. But I mean, the first 2 years I was there, all I did was sit at sumo day and night. And this is a very typical, this is a yobidashi.
Wow.
Can you see it?
Yes.
This is a 1.5-minute drawing.
Wow.
Because the yobidashi, it's during the kabure, where the sorry, it's crooked, where the katekyoji is up there on the dohyo, and he's holding up, you know, the beautiful calligraphy that shows you the names of the each pairing for the day.
Mhm.
And this guy, and then he turns around and he hands it to the yobidashi, who holds it up to the audience and shows it. And they're only there like 1.5 minutes, not even 2 minutes. So I have to draw very fast.
Yeah.
And you were sitting like during a tournament in the sand seats, or would you sit?
Oh no, I'd be sitting like maybe 3 rows back from the dohyo.
Okay.
Wow.
I
And
mean,
that's, you're drawing that with pencil, with charcoal? What are you drawing that with?
I use a very, very, very soft black pencil, but it's so soft you can see. The Japanese always thought I was using a brush because you can get a lot of, how do I say, a lot of variety of line, thin and thick. So the Japanese people are used to brush paintings and they loved it because it reminded them of brush paintings. So that's one, get rid of that. And then, so I developed that, and after a while I would do a lot of these drawings. This is also done by the dohyo. This I think I showed you before, but I put it on a board so you can see it.
That's
better.
gorgeous. Now,
I don't
would
know
you
how to
see
get-
this? Would you see this moment and for 1.5 minutes capture it in your mind? Or how does an artist see something so quickly, especially in sumo, and translate that to paper in such a short period of time?
I just draw very fast. You know, while he's there, I'm drawing what I see. And because he's there stationary for 1.5 minutes, it's like sitting duck, you know. But with these guys, for instance, well, Takanohana is on the dohyo. Is this? I'm sorry, I can't quite get this.
Yes, it's perfect. It's stunning.
Anyway, if you look, you can see Takanohana is on the dohyo, and he's pretty stationary for probably 20 seconds. That's all I need to get the line drawing. And then, and then I get Musashi Maru. But the thing is that this is a very involved drawing. So, you know, I do the drawing first and then I paint into it. And this could take me the whole tournament practically to do it.
Yeah.
But because I do the line drawing first, and then I may have to catch Musashi Maru 2 or 3 more times when he's standing at the dohyo doing the same thing with someone else. You know, so I piece it together. And I never carried a camera. You know, we didn't have phones then. We could take a picture. I never took pictures. And I just did it, you know, piece by piece over a period of many days. And I used to have these, you know, these old men. I'd be sitting. I never sat in the first row because I was terrified. You know, I didn't want anybody falling on me.
Yeah.
But I would always find an empty. You know what it looks like around the dohyo? They have the zabuton, the purple pillows, and invariably there are pillows that are vacant because people don't show up, or they don't show up till later. So I would just like, you know, get in there and sit down like I own the place. That's the only way you have to do. And I'd sit there and start drawing, and people would say, "What the hell is that?" But then they saw me drawing and they got interested, so they let me alone. And then I had these guys, you know, these old guys in these funny, you know, these suits, these from 1942, and they'd be they'd be crawling through the crowd, pushing people aside and saying, I like that, can I have it? And I'd say, no, and then I realized I shouldn't answer them that way. So I started telling them, yes, you can have it for $1,000,000.
Yeah.
And they
And
started
they look
to
at me
buy
like, who the hell do you think you are? And they get out of my face. So the word got around, they stopped asking me. But then I started selling them for $1,000,000 and 3,000,000 yen, and well, I mean, the reason I was in Japan in the first place is because I was dragged over there against my will. I didn't want to go. I was being a fashion illustrator for, Gimbel's department store in New York City. It's out of business, but they had acquired Saks Fifth Avenue, which is a much higher level department store. And they hired me just about out of college, to be a fashion illustrator for Saks on staff. So I was doing that, but I wanted to do some freelance illustration work because I love doing illustration, very finished illustration. So I went to see an art director at Esquire magazine, and he happened to be Japanese. And he looked at my work, and I showed him some of my fashion work, and he said, would you like to do fashion for a Japanese company? And me, I grew up with very provincial, I mean, they were wonderful parents, but they were very provincial, not international at all. And I was a bit provincial myself. And have you ever seen that poster, that famous poster where it's like a map of the United States, and it has New York, a little bit of New Jersey, and then blank, and then Los Angeles.
Yes.
That's America to most people, So that was in my head. I mean, there was no other place outside of me. It was New York was it, that was it. There was no, I mean, you go to the edge of New York, you fall off the earth. I mean, really.
Yeah.
So I assumed it was in New York, somewhere, New York City. And I said, well, yeah, where in New York is it? He said, no, it's Tokyo. And I said, yeah, no, I don't want to go. I didn't know where Tokyo was. I didn't care. I wasn't interested. And that night so every path led to sumo, unwittingly. That night I happened to have, I was like 25 years old, and I happened to have a dinner appointment with this kind of older man. He was a professor at Columbia University. He was a professor of Japanese something or other at Columbia University. And I met at a friend's party a week before, and he had invited me to dinner. So that night I met him for dinner. And he was old. He was like 48 years old or 45 years old. But to me, he was like ancient. And he had this frizzled hair and his eyebrows like Solzhenitsyn. And but he's brilliant, and brilliant is sexy, as people should know. And he was fascinating to talk with, and I had nothing to talk to him about. He's a professor of Japanese something or other. I didn't know he was a world famous Japanese scholar, translator of many books, notably Mishima, who was a good friend of his. And I was just like, this crazy artist, in New York. I was having dinner with this guy. I didn't know who he was. And just to make conversation, I said, I was offered a job to go to Tokyo today to be a fashion illustrator. And he said, well, you're going, aren't you? And I said, no, I don't. I have no interest in going to Japan. He said, no, you have to go. And he spent 3 hours over sushi and sashimi, which I had never had before. And I was very reluctant to try it. But once I tried it, I was hooked. And 3 hours convincing me I had to go. So I called the art director back the next day. I said, all right, put me on the list for consideration. I'll go. And the art director called me a week later, and he said, come in and see me. I went in and saw him. He said, well, we had 10 candidates and they chose you. I said, okay. And they said, do you know why would you want to know why they chose you? I said, yeah, okay, why did they choose me? I mean, I was pretty good as a fashion illustrator. I probably wasn't the best in the world, but and they said, well, because they thought you would survive. And it was like a couple of years before I thought about that.
Yeah, understood.
What did they mean? But after a couple of years in Japan, I understood exactly what they meant, because not everybody would put up with the crap that I had to put up with. But I put up with it because, I get a job that I can do well. I'm going to work at it, even though people keep throwing roadblocks in my face. And I did it. And that's in the book too. That was a nightmare. It was a nightmare. Not a life-threatening nightmare, but one. I mean, I constantly had feelings I wanted to grab my stuff and get back on a plane and get the hell out of here. But I stayed, and it was good that I stayed. And then I discovered sumo. one day on television, and it grabbed me like nothing had ever grabbed me. I was supposed, oh, you asked, was that the beginning of being an artist? Before I went to Japan in 1973, I signed up as a court artist because I draw so fast.
Yeah.
So I signed up as a court artist with ABC and CBS Network News, beginning of Watergate.
Mm-hmm.
And nobody knew what a huge scandal and, you know, life-changing event it would be. And they would send me somewhere, fly me off somewhere in America, Texas, Florida, God knows where. And I would sit in court at a Watergate hearing, do my drawings, fly back. And this happened maybe 4 days a week, maybe 5. And the thing is that I was faster than everybody. There are a number of people, men and women, who got very famous doing that. But none of them could draw like I could. And, you know, I can say it because I can back it up. And one time I remember with the Segretti hearing, it was the first, Segretti was called the Weasel. This is, you know, 1973, even though most people weren't alive then, but he was a Cuban immigrant and he was a lawyer. But he was this guy who was like 5 foot nothing, little tiny guy. And he was famous for being able to get into anywhere. So the Republicans hired him to break into the Democratic, offices at the Watergate Hotel. And the Republicans came in, you know, kind of what they do now. You know, they just rifled through everything, took what they could do so they could make their own rules.
Yeah.
And they got caught. And I was sent to cover the Segretti hearing, which was preliminary to his trial. And that's a long story, but every news bureau had to hire their own artist. You know, 73, no internet, no phones, no nothing, no email. So each one of us had a cameraman standing outside the courtroom waiting to shoot whatever drawings we got so they could get it up on TV. Well, Segretti came in to our right, flanked by 2 huge cops. He was in chains. They dragged him in. As he walked by me, I got a quick drawing of him flanked by these 2 cops. I mean, I got a drawing in like a minute. And then he was standing with his back to us in front of the judge. He was there for a minute and a half by somebody's count. And then they dragged him out. And I got a drawing of him standing, you know, like that in front of the judge. So I had 2 drawings. And then they dragged him out. And then the other 6 artists who didn't know me and ignored me like I wasn't there, they all kind of got into a huddle. Nobody got anything. It was too fast. And they were all saying, okay, what can we do? We can go back to my bureau. I have some pictures. We can do some drawings, some pictures. And they all ran out and totally ignored me like I wasn't there. Yeah. Meanwhile, I had two drawings. It took me like a minute or 2 to just clean them up. I ran out to the hallway. My photographer from CBS News shot them and ran back to CBS. And they were the first, CBS was the first news bureau to get these drawings up with their story about the Segretti hearing, because I was the only one to get the drawings done. So CBS loved me. They sent me everywhere. And then they offered me the first Watergate trial in August of 1973. They called me up, no, in July. They called me and said, you're the best court artist. We want you to cover the first Watergate trial. And I said, oh my God, I just signed a contract to go to Japan to be a fashion illustrator for 6 months. And they said, well, when are you leaving? I said, I'm leaving in August, September, October. Okay, you'll be back in January? I said, yeah, great. You got the job because the trial starts in February. I said, fabulous, my dream job. I couldn't wait to get back. So I thought about it for the first couple of months I was in Japan. Like, I can't wait to get back and do that they told me it would be months. Yeah. And that was my dream, to sit there for months and months and months, and get paid for it and draw. And that's all I had to do. Draw, go to lunch, go back and draw. I love it. But the last 2 months I was in of my 6-month job in Japan, I discovered sumo, and it literally became the rest of my life. Wow. That's all I did was network, find people, meet people, to get into the sumo world. It became a full-time job. I even dreamed about it. I was eating, sleeping, and breathing sumo. I completely forgot to go home. I forgot to go back to New York. I know, it's nuts. And I forgot, because all I could see was sumo. It became the beginning of the rest of my life, literally. And I got into the sumo world because I was introduced to lots of people, but in the end, a guy named, very important, a playwright, very famous playwright in his 70s, named Funabashi Seiichi. And he was the head of the Yokozuna selection committee. Can't get any higher than that as a civilian, a non-sumo personnel. So he was blind, but he invited me to his house, and his daughter who I became very friendly with was his eyes, and when he needed sight. So I brought my portfolio and I showed her, and she was explaining in Japanese what she thought of my artwork, which was very good, and what my thoughts were and what I wanted to do. And he introduced me to the 3 top sumo stables. And once Funabachi Sensei said, Lynn is coming to do drawings of you, bring out the zabuton and the tea, she's my guest. Everybody treated me like royalty. And I started going to the 3 top sumo stables. That was Tatsunami Bear, Katsukano Bear, and I can't remember what the other one, it doesn't come to me, but anyway, and I went, and usually, an honored guest goes once or twice, maybe 3 times, and then they disappear. Well, this guy never left. I started going, and I never stopped going, and I was there until the point where, they'd say, Lynn, get your own zabuton, because when I would go in, they would pick up the zabuton, put it down, and somebody would come with a little cup of tea for me. And after a few weeks, it was like, zabuton's over there. So I'd walk in, I'd get my own zabuton, I'd sit down, and no, people ignored me, which is fine. I mean, that's all I required of them.
Yeah.
Ignoring me like I'm not here. And the first stable I went to was Tatsunami Beya. They had a lot of top rikshi there. They had a Saikuni, who was Ozeki. They had Kurohimeyama, who was Sekiwake, and a whole bunch of other guys. And it's always the same way. Even if I've worked with the NFL, I've worked with Major League Baseball, it's always the same thing when I'm the new face. The guys kind of look at me for the first 4 days, nobody gets near me. And on the 5th day, maybe the 4th day, the top guy, the guy who can do what he wants,
Yeah.
he walks up to the foreigner or the new face and says, okay, so let me see what you're doing. And that clinches it. That's when I get in with everybody. When they see the drawings, I'm in.
Right.
So the 4th day, Kurohimeyama and a couple other guys came up to me after practice and said, all right, so let's see what you're doing. So I gave them the sketchbook and they flipped through it and they saw their own face and they're saying, in Japanese, of course, they say, hey, so-and-so, get over here. Look, she's got your face here. Look at you. Your hair's all messed up. Look at you. Oh, look, she even got the dirt on your chest, when you fell down on the dirt. And they were excited.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden it was okay.
They
And-
loved having you around. And as far as the game and understanding and wrestling and what you were watching, how long did it take you to kind of figure out, going from I'm hooked on television to I know what's going on?
It was cool. It's a good question, but it was a pretty quick learning curve because for one thing, all I'm doing, I'm drawing.
Mm-hmm.
But 100% of the time I'm observing. I'm looking. I am not looking anywhere else but watching them. And you get a lot out of observing. Most people don't really see what they're looking at. And I had to, because if I didn't see it clearly, I couldn't get it down on my page.
Mhm.
Right.
And I always took a translator with me. There were no end of English-speaking Japanese people, men or women, who were absolutely thrilled to drop whatever they had that morning and take me to sumo and because nobody could go to sumo. You can't just walk into a sumo stable.
Right.
Now there are organizations, you can pay them and they'll take you on a little tour and it's very commercial and I don't care. But then 70s, 80s, 90s, you couldn't go into a sumo stable unless you knew somebody important. So when I would call somebody up and say, listen, I need somebody to go with me and sit at sumo and translate for me quietly. They have to understand the proper decorum. They have to be Japanese. I couldn't take a foreigner who spoke Japanese. Had to be a Japanese who knew how to act, because you can't move, you can't jump around, you can't be stupid, you have to be very polite, you have to know what to do, or what not to do, more importantly. So I always had a translator with me, and I always had good people who explained things to me. Like this one guy became a good friend of mine. Oh, next time I can show you this photo, it's wonderful. Of Iwashita Zeki. Unfortunately, he passed away when he was in, I think, his 30s. He was just the loveliest person in the world. He became Sekiwake in Tatsunami Beya, and he spoke a little English. We became very good friends. When he first came in as a baby, he was 15, which is when you're supposed to start sumo. They were throwing him around the dojo like a rag doll, rolling him around in the clay. And when you're sweating and you roll around in the clay, you come up looking like, like a monster because you're covered with dark clay. And so it was explained to me that when he entered sumo, he was too fat. And he had to lose 100 pounds before they could start working him out. because he couldn't move. He was so big. And they got him down 100 pounds within a couple of months. And then they started working him out, and he rose to the top. But, you know, he wound up with, he was on, when he was in his early 30s, I think it was early 30s, late 20s. I'd have to look at my notes. His kidneys were failing and he had to go on dialysis. And I knew his son, who was very, very sweet. In fact, I'm still in touch with his son, and his son called me in the middle of the night one night, and he didn't speak English, but he said in English, I just want to cry when I think about this. He called me in the middle of the night and he said, "My father is gone." Sorry.
No, it's
No.
okay.
I mean, a
He
testament.
was just so unfair. He was the sweetest guy in the world. He was so smart and so kind. And but, you know, I think the life killed him, because they filled him up with alcohol and they rolled him around in the dirt, and they probably injured, you know, these guys get so many injuries.
Right.
It's just horrible. And they don't treat them right. Their medical ability is piss poor. That's the best I could say for it.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's any better today.
That's the hard part, you know, when you watch sumo and you see all these guys get injured all the time, and you know, they do that in practice every single day, you know, and you think, golly, what they give for the love of the sport.
Let's say it like it is. They do it for the love of the sport, maybe in some part, but let's be clear about it. Most guys, not all of them, there are a few who came from, like Kaneshido. I remember one guy in Kaskana Bay came from a very wealthy family, but most guys go into sumo because they're a little hefty, shall we say. And they, you know, as teenagers growing up, their parents are too poor to feed them because they have other children.
Right.
So they send them into sumo so somebody else will feed them and house them and clothe them. And they go in for the flash and dazzle. They go in to get famous. I'll tell you why my husband, Iwa Torizeki, he's not my husband any longer, but the guy who I married, his story is kind of tragic too. But part of it is when he was a youngster, he had one older brother and two younger brothers, and his father had been a cop, but he was a gambler and he lost his job as a cop. And he continued to gamble. And one night, gambling, he lost their house to the Yakuza, to the gangsters.
Wow.
And nobody knew till the next day when the gangsters came and his father ran away. They threw out his mother and his three brothers. They threw him out of the house because they said, "It's our house now, get the F out," you know? And they were in the street. And fortunately, he and his family, what was left of it, was they were able to go live with their grandmother and actually, it wasn't a blood relative. His grandfather had had a stroke and was in a wheelchair and could not do anything. And he was married to his second wife, who was not related to the boys or their mother, but she took them all in and she raised them. And his father, it's interesting because the Japanese, I don't know how you feel about this, or your listeners feel, but the Japanese believe in things like psychics and otherworldly things and ghosts, and oh boy, do I have ghost stories. Anyway, his father fell off a bridge years later and died, drowned. And he always wanted to know, did he commit suicide or did he jump? And that makes a difference to a kid, I think. I don't know. But I knew a very, very powerful psychic in New York. And when we were married and living in New York City, the psychic came and she knew. She didn't know anything about Torah or anything about sumo or anything about anything about us. But she said, she said to Torah, she said, "You want to know, when your father went off that bridge, did he jump or did he fall by accident?" He didn't even ask her the question. I mean, I'm getting chills. I mean, these psychics, the real thing is the real thing, let me tell you. And she said, "I want you to know he fell. He did not mean to jump." And Torah was so relieved. I mean, he still lost his father. But anyway, I stray. That's why I always do. I'm sorry. Anyway, he wound up going into sumo at the age of 13 because he was an orphan and they allowed him in.
Okay.
And he started his career then.
And that was
So
a good chance of making a
Oh,
life for yourself.
That's it. That's why I was talking about him, because his mother also ran away. His mother ran away the day that his grandmother took him in. His mother ran away. Yeah, great people, right?
Ooh,
And abandoned 4 kids. How can you do that? So he told me when I first met him that the reason he joined sumo is because he was hoping, and he was only 5'9". He was the shortest guy in the top division, 300 pounds, the lightest guy in the top division. Top division is, 480, 550. He was 300 pounds, which is nothing. And he said he joined sumo because he was going to make it to the top, no matter what. And the top division is on TV. And he wants to get onto TV as a top division sumo wrestler so his mother will see him and want to find him again.
Oh,
That's his story.
Heartbreaking.
God,
Yeah.
that is unbelievable.
Yeah. And she did.
She did.
So she found out he did make it to the top, which was against, whatever, anything rational, because he was so small. But he was a brilliant technician. And some friends told his mother that, oh my God, isn't that your son on television? And she came to see him at the Osaka tournament, and they sat down. Well, I'll tell that story in my book. I'll tell it. That's in my book. You have to read the book.
Okay, so tell us about your book.
We want to be able to tell our
Yeah.
listeners your book, which is going to be all about your life involved in sumo. You were a commentator for the NHK. You've just done everything. You were friends with Chiono Fuji.
Oh, he was my
somebody left.
mentor. Yeah.
Yeah. Hakuho.
Alcohol.
Oh,
You
Hakuho.
had Akibono, Musashi Maru. You were there
mean-
in the golden age.
The golden age of sumo, yes.
I think people would just go crazy over these stories.
This is Chiono Fuji, very young. I think he was Judio at the time.
He
This is a drawing of Chiono, very quick, can you see it? A very
Oh.
quick pencil drawing of
Wow.
Chiono.
Yeah,
Fuji.
look at the jawline.
Oh my
I
God.
mean, it's
He is
amazing
the most
how,
handsome of all
how
time.
much you can get across in just
few
the
lines.
shortest amount of
Amazing.
time. Yeah. Like, how do you capture someone's essence and someone's beauty in just a few pencil drawings? That's
Well, when I get my book done and it's published and I can stop working on it every day till it makes me crazy, I am going to start an online drawing
class.
drawing class.
Oh,
I-
I want to sign up.
Okay, I'll let you know.
I
We
would
can
too.
announce it on the podcast.
Yes.
But I took a class for 9 years. I studied with Jack Potter, he's not with us any longer, unfortunately, but he had a class at School of Visual Arts called Drawing and Thinking. And that's what it was.
Okay.
And I could always draw well, but after 4 or 5 months in his class, you put anything in front of me in 30 seconds, I got it. Because he
Wow.
knew, and there were 30 people in the class, and some of them were like architects who couldn't draw a straight line without a ruler.
Yeah.
And they were drawing by the end of the semester, but not like I do. I mean, I could draw anything in a nanosecond, and I took that to Japan, and that's what I used. So I was studying with Jack Potter for 9 years, but I'd go back and forth to Japan, and he'd let me sit with him. But I learned from him how to draw very fast. He would teach you to draw from the gut, and that's what I want to try to, teach people, that you're looking with your eyes, and your hand holding your pencil. I'm left-handed, right-handed, and your eyes is a conduit to the pencil in your hand, but you're feeling it in your gut. And he taught us in his way to, when you're looking at something, it's a flower, a bird, a person, whatever, a tennis ball, doesn't matter. You feel it more than you see it. And when you can feel it, you feel it as you draw it. And he would get almost sexy with us, saying, he'd pair us off, with the person next to us, and feel that nose like it's up against your cheek, and feel the lips and feel it, and, somebody bangs that into your head for a couple of years, you do it.
Yeah.
And that's what I did. I mean, I would draw these guys. I know them better than they know themselves, So I was
You
very,
captured not just their form, but their essence.
Yeah.
Like
Oh,
that's
thank
what's
you.
fascinating when I look at your work, is that like you've picked up the expression of the heat of the moment.
oh my God, thank you.
But it's the truth. But that's what I see when I see your work. And I hope everyone who's listening to this podcast seeks out Lynn's work, because you're obviously a fan of sumo, all of our listeners, but to see it from somebody who's there in the moment, picking up whatever that essence was, how many ever years ago, to look at your artwork is just like taking a trip back in time.
Oh, thank you so much for saying. You've got to write a forward to my book. I mean, nobody said it better than you. I mean, Chiono Fuji said the most wonderful things. I was telling who was I talking to yesterday?
Me. That was me.
Yeah, I was telling you about how he went to all of my openings.
Mm-hmm.
And the guy was a Renaissance man, and he would say things like what you're saying. I wanted him to write a foreword to my book, but he died before I got a chance to ask him. Like, I can't believe, it's such a loss to lose that guy. Can you see this? This is
Yes.
this is Hokuto Umi, grand champion, in the dressing room,
Yeah.
reading
Oh,
the Toikumi Hyo, which is today's fights. And
Oh
he's
my
got
goodness.
Skibito behind him.
yeah.
And he's now Hakaku Oyakata. He's the chairman of the Sumo Association now. This was like a long time ago, 1989. But Konishiki said that to me. I did a drawing of him. I don't have it with me right here, but I still own the original, but I have prints of it, and I have some prints where he signed it. They're big prints, and he signed it in this big fat brush. They're beautiful. Still have a few left if anybody wants them, because I split them with him. I split the edition with him. But I did a drawing of him sitting on the riser in the dressing room while he was still Ozeki champion, and surrounded by his guys. And he was wearing this towel that had stars and stripes on it, which is why I did the drawing, because he looked so great in that. And I did this full drawing. It took me 3 days. I was drawing like a madman, trying to get it all done. And then I showed it to him after he retired, shortly after.
Yeah.
And he looked at it, and there were tears in his eyes. And he said, he's this big hulking. When you talk to Konishiki, I used to say that you have no peripheral vision. It's Konishiki from east to west,
True.
and from top to bottom, but all Konishiki. And he was standing there, he was holding the drawing, and he was looking at it, and there were tears in his eyes. And he said, man, he said, this is how I felt when I was at the top. He could see, he could read his face.
Yeah.
And people tell me that when I do a portrait, I do portraits of kids, I do portraits of dogs. And people say, I'm not a dog person, I'm a bird person. And I do a portrait of a dog, and I don't know who knows the word grok. If you ever read the book, Stranger in a Strange Land, is this wonderful word, grok. Read the book, it's amazing. 30 years ago. But I pick up their vibes and their sensibilities and their feelings, and I feel what they feel. Otherwise, I can't do it. I mean, it's like an empath, like if I sit next to somebody on a train and they are sick, I get sick. I feel their sickness. If they have a broken arm, my arm hurts. And it used to scare me, but if I get away from that person, within a half hour, it's gone. But I use that for my drawings. But people say, oh my God, you got him, whether it's a kid or a dog or a husband or whatever it is. So I don't know, I'm just lucky I have that, I can do that. Well, I just want to show this. Can you see it with it's got a cellophane over it.
Yes.
Takanohana.
It's a montage of Takanohana and Akebono. And it's one of my favorite pieces. I'm going to say right here that it was stolen in Hawaii, the original. And I'm talking to the FBI about it. I want it back, the original. But I have a beautiful print edition of it. I have a wonderful printer who's making me prints of it. And it's available, the very limited edition.
That's incredible.
And yeah, it's Takanohana Akebono with a tachimochi in the middle. It's an inkjet print. And it's signed with my chop and the whole thing.
Was the Konohana one of your favorite subjects, or did you have a favorite subject, or just all of them?
Yeah, who was your
No,
favorite?
all of them, But
Yeah.
the thing is that there are people, of course, who are special. I knew Takanohana from the time he was 5 years old, and his brother Wakanohana. I mean, there were fat little kids rolling around the dojo being totally obnoxious when they were little, and they grew up to be who you know them to be. And I just followed them since they were kids. So, I love them. And they're very sweet, very nice. Takanohana is a very sweet, nice, lovely person. And he really got ripped to pieces by, well, you know what, you guys, I think I mentioned everybody should see this amazing movie I saw the other night, Elvis. It's about Elvis Presley, and it's one of the most tragic stories you'll ever see. And I have to say that you could make a movie about Takanohana that would be very similar. The way he was used, abused, and eaten up. And yeah, he's still alive, but I don't know how well he is. His older brother, Wakanohana, was smart and got out of the sumo world.
Right.
But I have to say, I can't say I have any favorites, But the guy who meant the most to me was Jonah Fuji, because I just followed him since he was like a child in sumo.
Mhm.
You know, he had just come into the top division, and he was always very receptive, you know, to my drawing him. He was always very nice. And he'd always, you know, make comments like, that sucks, or you shouldn't do that, or start over, that's no good, you know, or don't draw that guy, he's ugly. You know, I mean, he spoke his mind. And he did to me. I think he probably did to other people too. But I spent a lot of time with him. I used to go with him to Trader Vic's, which is my favorite restaurant in the whole world, in Tokyo, at the Niotani Hotel. And once a year, we would go to Trader Vic's, and we would go in the middle of dinner service, you know, like on a Friday night, and I'd bring my portfolio. He only wanted to see the drawings I did with him in them. Didn't want to see anybody else.
I'm sorry,
Well-
that's hilarious.
That's Jonah Fuji. And we would go through the drawings and the paintings. You know, I start with a drawing and winds up being a painting. And I remember, well, you know, he loved to eat like I love to eat, you know, no entrees. They would put two big tables together, and we'd have every appetizer that they made spread out on these two big tables. And that's what we ate. And of
Really?
course, when we walked through the restaurant, they always paraded us through the restaurant to the end, to the last
Of course.
possible
yeah.
place we could sit. So everybody, like, you could hear forks dropping and people gasping, because this guy was like a god.
Yeah.
And he wore this beautiful green kimono, looked like an emerald stone. And of course, his beautiful chomage, like I was telling you the other day, he would say, I have the most beautiful chomage, don't I? Nobody has one like I do. And I goes, of course. Yes, it's the best. And it was beautiful. And we would sit there, and I would show him all the drawings and paintings I did of him that year. And of course, I would take top guys to Trader Vic's, and I would never get a bill because they always comped me if I brought in the stars, you know, so that was good for me.
Yeah.
So, and we go through all the drawings and all the paintings, and he'd pick the one. He would say, "Are chodai." Are means that one. It's slang. Chodai, give me.
Okay. Oh. And
And
would you?
and that means that one was gone. You know, I had to give it to him. So at the end of his life, he had 8 of my very best paintings.
Oh,
But there was one that I still have that I'll show you next time that I refused to give him. And next time we talk, I'll tell you, because I have to show you in pantomime what he did, because I refused to give it to him.
okay.
Because it took me
Okay.
3 tournaments to get it done. It's my best ever, and I still own it. And I have prints of it, but he threw a tantrum when I told him I wouldn't give it to him. Anyway,
Really?
it was really funny. That's why I'd love to make a movie, because I'd like to see these things. I'd like people to see this stuff, you know.
Yeah.
And I don't know who they could find to represent Jonah Fuji, but
Was
We'll
he
do it.
just larger than life when you were in his presence? I mean, was he just towering, or was he just, what was his essence? Or his
well, that's a very
presence like?
interesting. It's a good question, a very interesting one. And you know, celebrities look larger than life, and that's what they're presented as, you know, because the hype has to be to the max to make them who they want you to see. But it's like, do you know who Yul Brynner was? He was a
Yeah.
big Broadway star.
Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah, and he was like, you know, Yul Brynner.
Yeah.
But one day I saw him in person. I was standing on a street corner in New York City, and he got out of a limo. I'm 5'9".
Yeah.
He may have been 5'8" if he was that much. He was a little tiny guy.
Oh, that hurts to hear that, doesn't it?
No, I mean, you know, look what they did with him. This is Hollywood, you know,
I
or
know, they make him look
Yeah.
like bigger than.
yeah. I mean,
That's
they're famous stars who used to stand on a box if they were, you know, opposite a tall starlet because they were too short.
Tom
Well,
Cruise.
Jonah Fuji, they had him down as 6 feet tall. Okay,
I'm
and he's
guessing
not
he was
alive
less
now,
than
so I will bust the myth. Yeah, he's built like, you know,
Right.
and his shoulders were like huge. And that was, I was telling you, because he had a problem with his shoulders keep getting dislocated. So he built his shoulders up like crazy to keep his bones together.
Yeah.
But he worked out like a demon. And he had very low, you know, fat ratio. You know, he was all muscle. But I was 5'9". And I have to tell you, when I mean, I spent a lot of time with him. We would stand in front of each other and talk. We were eye to eye. And maybe he was 5'10", he was not 6 feet tall.
Maybe the chonmage gave him the extra inches.
They
You
measure
think?
with the chomage.
I don't know. And I never cared. I mean, who cares?
Yeah.
Look at him
right?
on the dojo.
Yeah.
I mean,
And the guy was a Renaissance man. I told you that story about what he, we don't have a lot of time here. But I mean, he would critique my artwork and he was always right. And he would say, if you did this or you did that, it would be better. Or if you didn't do that, it would be worse. And he was always right. And I didn't know it. I was doing, I do my drawings by instinct and gut. I'm not thinking.
Yeah.
But he would look at it and analyze it with his brilliant mind. And he'd say, no, no, no. And he was always right. And he would give me, advice as to how to deal with people and how to talk to people and who to ignore and who not to ignore. He was an amazing man. I always said that he would be the top of whatever profession he chose, whatever,
Yeah.
because that's who he
Okay.
was.
You have to give me one story about Hakuho,
Ah!
just because he's my man.
Oh, he's a beautiful man. He's a beautiful human being. One of the sweetest, nicest people I've ever met. Ever, in sumo or anywhere. But at a certain point, when he was coming up in the ranks, I think he was sekiwake. And you say in sumo, you never say you're going to be grand champion. You never think about it. You just keep working your ass off until maybe you make it, if you're lucky. But very few people make it,
Right.
And you just don't say, oh, I'm going to be grand champion. Nobody would say that unless they were nuts or like such an egotist. Anyway, so I think he was sekiwake at the time. And I was commuting back and forth between New York City and Tokyo, continuing my work and doing the sumo commentary. And so I went to see his practice one day. And after practice, we sat, by the dojo, just the two of us, and we were talking for a while. And I told him, he said, well, what are you doing in New York City? And I said, well, there's no sumo, unfortunately. So I'm working with basketball. I'm working with the New York Knicks. And I always said, I worked with the New York Jets years ago doing drawings of them when Joe Namath was the quarterback, and I worked with, and I was working with the New York Knicks. And I always said, I specialize in losing teams, but they all make good drawings. So I said, I'm working with the New York Knicks. He said, oh my God, really? And he launched into this story about he always wanted to be a professional basketball player. And what is he? I don't remember. 6'6", something like that. It's really tall.
6'6",
I mean-
6'2", 6'3", 6'4".
No, he's not
something
6'2", 6'3", so he's taller than that.
like that.
Akebono was 6'8". He was not 6'8", but he was probably 6'5", 6'6". You can look it up. Anybody can look it up.
Oof,
I don't remember.
big.
But he said he always wanted to be a professional basketball player, and he was really into basketball seriously growing up. But people, around him, when he was going into his teens, convinced him to try sumo. Just try it. Just go to Tokyo and try it, and look what happened.
Yeah,
that was
yeah.
good advice. But he really loves basketball. So we were talking about basketball, for like an hour. He loves it. But he's really a sweetheart. One of the nicest people you ever want to know.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I could just talk to
I
you
know.
for hours.
We could talk forever.
Because you need to raise money to, fund your efforts here, which are wonderful. So what I would like to offer is, I did 2 series of offset litho prints of really beautiful portraits of different rikshi and for my calendars. And one of the calendars, I was hit by a car when I was in Hawaii. Well, I was in a car, but I was smashed into, and I had a lot of injuries. I was never able to market it, and I never sold it. But I have a lot of the prints, and I can offer these prints if people would like to make a minimum of a $50 donation to you, and you'd have to tell them how they do that, a minimum of a $50 donation. They have to come to me through my website, contact me through the Contact Us form, get in touch with me. It's not up yet, but in the next week, I will put up the different prints that are available, and they can choose which print they want. And I will send them one of those prints. I'll even sign it, and I'll send them the print that they choose. If they make you a $50 donation and you tell them, you confirm they did it, I'll send them one of those prints.
Oh my gosh,
Okay.
you are so kind.
Yes.
Hey, I want to help,
No, that's awesome.
It's very
Thank you,
generous.
Well,
Lynn.
let's hope people rise to the occasion. Get off your butt and do it.
Yes.
So tell people how to find you online. What's your website?
The website is, everybody tells me I should change it. You could go to lynnmatsuoka.com and it will take you to my website. The official URL is Hamptons Artist, www.hamptonsartist.com, HAMPTONS artist.com. But it's a bit of a mishmash right now because other people have asked me for all kinds of things. I put them up there. I have to spend some time in the next couple of days, clean it up a bit, take some things off it. So look now if you want to see what's going to come down soon. But I'll
Well,
put.
I think I was looking at it, and I think anybody who's a sports fan, your artwork is amazing, and so many other sports. So like a lot of people love sumo, but they also are fans of many other sports. So your eyes will just be like a goggle. Is that a word?
Thank
Goggle.
you.
Yeah.
Looking at all of your other work, especially in the sports world.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Well, I've worked
and
with
birds.
baseball and football. Yeah.
I know.
And animals. I love the animals that you do as well.
I know, it's just so cool.
Yeah.
Oh,
Thank
Lynn,
you.
thank you
Thank you so much.
incredibly much for giving us your time.
Oh, thank
We,
you for
value
giving
your-
me the
Your
time.
talent and also just your insider's perspective that just nobody has on such a golden era of sumo wrestling, and also to just highlight the work. We have a lot of people in our world that create art as well, and sumo art, and so there's a lot of people fascinated in the artwork of sumo wrestlers, and especially from somebody who's so close to the inside and being there at a time when no one else had a peek into the world is
Yeah,
priceless.
there was nobody else there in the 70s and 80s, and it was the golden age of sumo, which is
Yeah.
what I'm writing about in my memoir.
Yes.
So if people come into my website and tell me they've donated to you, and they tell me which image they want me to send them, with their permission, I'll put them on a list of people who will be notified when I'm having book launches.
Perfect.
Perfect.
And we
Okay.
do need to have another discussion because
Oh,
we
yes.
can even get into the world of your color commentary at NHK and how you did that and what you talked about and what it was as a woman to be doing that. Like there's so much we could cover. Oh, that we're
There's
gonna
not
have to
enough
do this
hours
again.
in the day.
I know.
Isn't that wonderful though? There's a
Yes.
never ending number of, interesting things we could talk about forever and ever. I'm on Instagram at reportage artist,
Perfect.
because I'm a reportage artist. It's at reportage artist.
Well, we don't want to take any more of your time because
Yeah,
we
oh my
know
God,
that
I have to go.
You've got
Yeah,
to go.
you gotta go.
Lynn, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're the best.
Thank you. Talk to you again soon, I hope.
Okay.
Okay, yes.
We hope so too.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.